When I ask questions of an ancestor persona, I genuinely do not know what the response is going to be. The conversation unfolds in real time. In this video, I'm going to step back and let you experience a full interview. The exchange you're about to hear is a dramatized version of an encounter with William Price, an 1880s era Welsh coal miner from South Wales. The goal isn't to script a story, but to explore what it might have felt like to sit across the table from William and see it through their eyes. Good day, sir.
Good day to you, Bach. You've caught me at a quiet hour before the evening settles in proper. Have you business in the valley, or are you just passing through the row?
I've been sent down from London as a correspondent for a newspaper to understand what life is truly like for men working the pits in South Wales.
A correspondent from London, is it? Well, you'll find truth enough here if you're willing to listen past the ink and fancy words. Most that come from the city seem to want stories rather than what's real, and those are two different things entirely. Sit, if you've the time. I've worked the seams around Blaenavon and Pont Newydd most of my life, near 20 years or more underground. I can tell you what a man's day looks like, what the air tastes like when the ventilation fails, what a wage buys a family when it's lean. But I'll not dress it up for your readers, if that's your meaning. The pit doesn't dress itself up either. What is it you want to know? Whether we're worked to the bone? Whether the danger is as bad as the stories suggest? Or are you after something softer, the kind of tale that sells papers without troubling folks' consciences?
Thank you, sir. Let's start with this. What worries you the most when you leave for the pit in the morning?
The roof. Always the roof. Down there you can read the walls, listen to the timbers, feel the air shift. But the roof decides in its own time. I've seen strong men laid out quiet a Sunday after a fall, not gone, but never whole again. The rock didn't care who they were or who waited for them at home. I lost a mate years back in the Bedwellty workings. He was laughing not a minute before. That stays with you. Every morning when I leave for the pits, I think of Catherine and the children, Anne, Griffith, Caroline, and I think how thin the line is between coming home tired and not coming home at all. That's what worries me. Not the dark, not the work, the roof.
Yes, we've read the stories of the collapses over the years. When you think back on a working day, what stays with you the longest after it's over?
The tiredness first. Not the sort that sleep cures simple. It settles into your bones, your chest especially. You come up from the pit after 10, 12 hours in the low seams, breathing air so foul it coats your throat, and that weariness follows you home like a shadow. Even when you're sat by the hearth with a cup of tea, you feel the weight of it. But what stays longest is the small things, if I'm honest. The sound of the props creaking and the weight. You never quite stop listening for that, even when you're back in daylight. And the faces of the men you worked alongside, you notice things. Who moved slower that day? Whose cough was worse? Whether young Thomas was favouring his left shoulder after helping set the heavy timber? You carry all that with you. Some days I find myself thinking about whether a man is still whole or whether the pit took something from him that day. There was a boy, couldn't have been more than 12, hauling coves near me last month. His arms were already scarred from the rough stone. You see that, and you can't unsee it. When I wash at the tin bath that evening, I'm thinking about whether my own children will have stronger choices than that, whether I worked hard enough, been careful enough, that they might not have to spend their lives bent double in the dark. That's what stays. The pit doesn't leave you when you leave it. You carry it home in your muscles, your lungs, your thoughts.
Thank you. Do you ever get any time away from the pit? And when you do, what does that time mean to you?
Aye, there's a rest day most weeks when the pit shuts, or when I'm not called. Sunday for chapel mostly, and a half-day Saturday if the work allows it. Those hours are different. They're the air in a man's lungs after he's been breathing coal dust for 6 days. I rise before dawn most mornings, same as any working day, but on a Sunday there's no lamp to carry, no descent into the dark. Catherine, the wife, she has the children readied for chapel by the time I've washed. We walk together, the whole family, and there's something about that. The sound of hymns, the gathering of neighbours who've all known the same fare underground. It binds you differently than wages do. When old Morgan lost his boy in a fall at Bedwellty, the chapel knew before his own family was told proper. We stood with them. That's what those hours mean. You're not alone in it. At home after chapel, there's a simple meal. I mend tools, help the younger ones with their letters if they'll sit still. Anne and Griffith are sharp learners, thank God. Sometimes I read a bit of scripture by the fire. When my mother, Mary, was still living, she'd sit with me, and we'd speak of the forest of Dean where she came from. Those moments, they're worth more than any wages, though a man doesn't often say such things aloud. The time away the pit isn't rest in the way you might think. It's tending to what keeps a man whole.
Are most of the workers here locals, or have they been drawn here from elsewhere?
Both, mun. The valleys have always drawn men. Me own father, Griffith, came from Cinderford in the Forest of Dean when the work was opening up here. He brought the old ways with him, the knowledge of the seams. That was the pull of it. Men hearing there was steady work, better prospects than the old pecks back in England. But now it's different. The big ironworks at Blaenavon and the expansion of the collieries have brought men from all over, Irish lads looking for wages, English colliers moving between the pits, even some from further afield. The row I live in is packed tight with families who've come in the last 10, 15 years, chasing their work here. Yes, there's still folk like me who were born here, whose family put down roots when this was still a smaller place. The thing is, Bach, it's not romantic like some might imagine it. The newcomers come desperate. Desperate men take worse conditions, will work for less. That pushes wages down for all of us. The locals and the newcomers, we all suffer from it together, for sometimes there's tension over it. But when there's a disaster, a roof fall, a gas explosion, we're all Welsh miners then, all neighbours pulling the same rope. That's how it is, as I've known it. The work draws them, but the work also breaks them, whether they're from here or from 20 miles away.
That is indeed informative, sir. When something feels unfair underground, who do you take it up with?
That depends on what sort of unfairness you mean, and how willing you are to risk your place for speaking up. If it's a matter of safety, a prop that's not sound or bad air in a heading, a man speaks to the butty or the overman underground. They're the ones who can order work stopped or ventilation fixed. Most will listen if you've got good reason, though some are harder to move than others. A man's got to know which way the wind blows with his particular overman before he pushes too hard. I've seen lads sent topside without wages for complaining too much about working conditions. That's the real power they hold, your livelihood. For wages disputes or the way the corves are weighed, that's where things get thornier. You can take it to the pit agent or the viewer, but they're not there to favour the collier. Most of us have learned that lesson hard. The mutual aid societies help when a man's hurt or out of work, and there's strength in numbers when the whole pit stands together. But that takes courage, and not every man has it, especially with mouths to feed at home. The truth is, you complain alone and you'll likely lose your work. That's why there's so much talk now about standing together.
A man needs brothers beside him before he can speak fair against the owners.
Some men in London speak of wages as though they arrive cleanly in a man's hand. Can you tell me how you're paid here, and whether a collier truly sees the whole of what he earns?
Cleanly, you say. There's a word that shows you've never stood at a pay window underground. No, a collier sees precious little of what he's truly earned, and what he does see has been picked at from every direction. The way of it is this. I'm paid by the ton of coal I cut and haul out. Sounds straightforward enough. You work, you get paid for what leaves the pit. But between the seam and my hand, there's a dozen men taking their piece. The coal I cut has to be loaded into corves by the putters, young lads and women mostly, and they're paid separate from my earnings. Then's the timber I use for props, the candles for my lamp, sometimes even the wear on my tools. All of it comes from what I've earned. The pit master calls it deductions. Fair reckoning, they say. But when you're cutting coal in a seam that's barely 3 feet high, working 12 hours or more in dust and foul air, and half of what you've laboured for goes to pay for the very things that keep the roof from crushing you, fairness is a thin word, Bach. Then's the checkweir, or the lack of him. If there's a proper independent man weighing what comes out, we get a fairer count. But in some pits, the master's own man does the weighing, and I've known coal to be marked light when it's solid. A man can argue, but arguing doesn't put bread on the table. And some weeks, this is the bitterness of it, some weeks there's no steady pay at all. Accidents shut a pit for days. Bad air forces us out. The seam runs thin or wet. The machinery breaks. We don't get paid for standing idle, you understand. A collier has no wage unless he's cutting coal. In a good week, a steady man might see 30 shillings. In a lean week, 10 or less. My Catherine, my wife, she has to stretch that like a length of cloth, and there's no stretching cloth that thin across a family without something tearing. Is that the truth you came to hear?
This has been a very informative discussion. May I ask one further question? When you think about your children, what do you hope their lives will be like?
That's a question that sits heavy with me, friend. I've got 6 children. Anne, Griffith, Margaret, Thomas, and young Caroline. And I lost Sarah when she was barely more than an infant. That loss stays with a man. What I want for them is simple enough, though it feels like asking for the moon some days. I want them to have their bellies full, their backs warm, and their minds better schooled than mine ever was. I never had much learning, picked up my letters late, taught myself to read scripture in the chapel lamplight. But I've made sure Anne and the others go to school when they can, and I've kept books in the house. A man with education has choices. He doesn't have to crawl underground if there's another way open to him. The pit's no life I'd wish on any of them if honest work could take them elsewhere. The coal pays the rent and puts food on the table. I'm grateful for that much. But it wears a man down. The dust gets in your lungs. The roof can fall without warning. And a bad accident leaves you with nothing but a widow's pittance and neighbour's charity. I want better for them than that. A trade, perhaps. Carpentry, clerking, something that doesn't cost a man's health by the time he's 40. But I won't lie to you. Most of them will likely follow me down if the work's there. That's how the valley works.
And that brings our conversation with William to a close. If you're curious about how these ancestor personas work, or would like to explore an encounter yourself, you'll find more information in the description. Thanks for spending some time with us in the valleys.